The first discussion topic on today's Peace and Prosperity is the heated exchange of words between Pyongyang and Washington ahead of the year-end deadline for nuclear talks. In a statement released on December 8th, North Korea's Academy of National Defense Science said a very important test took place at the Seohae Satellite Launching Ground on December 7th. Seohae Satellite Launching Ground refers to the North's missile engine test site in Dongchang-ri, where the regime tested intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, in the past. It is the one that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un promised to completely dismantle at the Inter-Korean Summit in Pyeongyang last September. The North said the latest test will have an important effect in changing the regime's strategic position once again in the near future. Some speculate the important test might have involved ICBM engines, considering that the announcement was made by the Academy of National Defense Science, a weapons development center. U.S. President Donald Trump immediately took to Twitter saying, "Kim Jong-un is too smart and has far too much to lose. Everything actually, if he acts in a hostile way." In response, Kim Yong-chol, chairman of North Korea's Asia-Pacific Peace Committee and the regime's former top nuclear envoy, said, "The regime has nothing more to lose." The UN Security Council convened on December 11th at the request of Washington over Pyongyang's missile launches and the possibility of an escalatory provocation. Washington's request for a UNSC meeting to discuss North Korea is the first in 2 years. The U.S. has also significantly increased surveillance flights over the Korean peninsula since the North's testing of a super-large multiple rocket launcher on November 28th. A day after the North's announcement of an important test, the U.S. Air Force deployed its recon plane and RC-135W Rivet Joint over the peninsula. With less than 20 days to go until the year-end deadline set by Pyongyang, what does the exchange of bellicose rhetoric mean? To shed light on these latest developments, our host, Pyeongyang Shi, research fellow at Yonsei University's Institute for North Korean Studies, is joined by Park Won-gon, professor of international studies at Handong Global University. To broaden the perspective, we also connect with guest experts on Skype, including Jim Walsh, senior research associate at the MIT Security Studies program, and Mark Berry, associate editor of the International Journal on World Peace.
Hello and welcome to our program. Tensions between North Korea and the United States continue to rise. It's a glooming hour on the Korean Peninsula. Joining with us today to go in depth on what each side wants from the other is Professor Park Won-gon, professor at International Studies at Handong Global University. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me here.
All right, as I said, that the tension is rising rapidly between North Korea and the United States on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea announced on December 8th that it had conducted so-called a very important test at its Dongchang-ri missile test site. What do you think of North Korea is after with this test?
Well, North Korea has very clear intention. They do want to put pressure on United States, especially President Trump. You just mentioned that Dongchang-ri is very important for President Trump. I think many people remember that last year, when the U.S. and DPRK summit held in Singapore, after this summit, the President Trump has the press interview. And then at the time, he introduced that North Korea has promised to dismantle of the missile test site, which is Dongchang-ri.
Right.
And after that time, the President Trump has reiterated this kind of this promise several times in his rally. And he considered this is one of his major achievements for the North Korean denuclearization. But since this time, North Korea used the Dongchang-ri, so it's definitely hurt the promise, what President Trump has achieved. And second one is this is kind of a prelude to ICBM launch. The North Korea has released this statement by North Korea's Academy of National Defense Science. That is the one who is responsible for this ICBM development. And there is another agency in the north, that is National Aerospace Development Administration. That is responsible for the satellite launch. So it's very clear that North Korea this time has tested for the ICBM.
Not satellite.
Not satellite, yeah. And also, in that statement, they have put this word, the strategic position. The whole word will have an important effect on changing the strategic position of the PRK once again in the near future. Strategic position. This exact same word had used in year 2017, November 29th, when they launched the Hwasong 15, the ICBM. Right. They are saying that is the change their strategic position. And usually strategic position refers to North Korea's capability to deter against the United States nuclear power. So it's pretty clear that North Korea has ICBM engine test.
Seems like North Korean authority wants us to believe that this is truly ICBM test, not just a satellite launch. Right? In response to North Korea's announcement, U.S. President Donald Trump made a very hardline statement that Kim Jong-un could lose everything. And North Korea, also responded, in the same kind of words that Lee Soo-young, Vice President, said that we got to stop the exchange, obviously worry, but the Kim Yong-chol, who has been the appointment for the nuclear dialogue with Washington, said that we are not afraid. We have nothing to lose. What do you read of this exchange of very hardline statements?
Well, also Trump very clearly mentioned that not to interfere this upcoming U.S. election, which will be held the next year, November. And this is very important for the President Trump, especially he put this so-called red line, which is this ICBM test and nuclear test by the North.
Right.
So I think the first United States has a very clear message to send to the North Korea that not to cross this red line, not to have a nuclear and ICBM test. But if North Korea would launch ICBM or this nuclear test, that is totally break up the dialogue. But there is a very high possibility that this, you just mentioned, the several government, the North Korean government official, is kind of saying that there is a possibility that they are going to have this, the nuclear or the ICBM test. So this time we are seeing very kind of escalation of tension. If really the North Korea would do this ICBM test, that will be a total break up of this dialogue. But still, at this moment, I don't think the North Korea will cross the red line, at least at the end of this year, because Chairman Kim Jong-un himself very clearly mentioned that the end of the year is his deadline. So he will wait. But at this moment, using these high officials to put pressure on President Trump and the United States.
I see. Now we'll hear observations from the United States. Joining us on the line is Jim Walsh, Senior Research Associate at the MIT Security Studies Program. Hello, Dr. Walsh.
Well, it's good to be with you. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
All right. Welcome to Peace and Prosperity. How do U.S. experts view the important test in Dongchang-ri?
Well, we think it's important, but we don't know a lot about it. This was a facility that in the past was used to test engines, rocket engines, particularly rocket engines for satellite launches. That facility was shut down. It was reopened, and we know that there was a test. And from the few satellite pictures we have on our own, it suggests that it was a rocket test, not a missile test. In other words, something that was of a component on that site. And it adds to the growing expectation that North Korea will carry out what it thinks is a dramatic act between now and the end of the year, as they have been threatening to do since early last year. And among the possibilities of things they could do, they could have a nuclear test. They could test a long-range military missile. I think the betting money right now is on the third option, and this last test points in that direction, that they're going to test a rocket with the hope of putting a satellite into space. That's what people think will happen sometime over the next 3 weeks.
The U.S. Department of Defense maintains that if North Korea crosses the red line and engages in aggressive provocations, there will be a very strong response. What level of response are we talking about here?
Well, I think the level of response depends on the level of provocation. And there are different things that could happen that have different degrees of seriousness. So a satellite launch is not welcome, not good, a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, but not as bad as, let's say, a nuclear test or an above-ground nuclear test. So the U.S. response in partnership with Japan and South Korea will depend on the severity of the provocation. And we've gone through enough of these that we know what the sort of choices are here. The U.S. will probably resume military drills. It may move military assets to the region. It will seek to reassure its treaty allies, Japan and South Korea. It may take B-52s or other nuclear-capable aircraft and fly them near North Korean territory as a method of signaling. Congress will probably pass more sanctions. Now, those are all things that can be done. They're all things that have been done in the past. And so the question is less, will the U.S. respond? It will. But the question is what impact those responses will have, and that will depend on North Korea.
Right. This has been Dr. Jim Walsh at MIT. Thank you so much for your input.
Well, thanks very much. It's been nice chatting. I look forward to doing it again.
Professor Park, for the past 2 years, we were mainly talking about dialogue, engagement, shaking hands between leaders. Now we are talking about the deployment of B-52 back on the Korean Peninsula. What do you make of Dr. Walsh's analysis?
Well, basically, I fully agree with that, especially the American voters. They do not care about this foreign policy. We all know that. They are trying to vote based on this economy and especially domestic issue. And he raised a very important point. Around 43% of this so-called very strong supporter for the Donald Trump. No matter what happened, they support President Trump. So it makes very little impact by the North Koreans' possible launch of these missiles, ICBM, or the nuclear test. And the other point he raised, very interesting, is that, well, of course, I agree that if North Korea, they cross the red line, the United States, especially President Trump, will resume so-called maximum pressure that has been conducted in year 2017, including some kind of military options, redeployment of the strategic asset, and also sanction. But I put the emphasis on sanction because last March, President Trump mentioned officially, publicly that United States has prepared some kind of a sanction, but he withdrew not to use these sanctions. On scale 10, still the United States has just using kind of like 2 or 3 levels of the sanctions. So there are still huge rooms to put another additional lots of the huge sanctions on North Korea. So they are going to use sanction first.
So not military options first, but economic sanctions first.
Well, military option is a little bit sensitive one, especially President Trump has kept saying that is very expensive, like the redeployment of the strategic asset and also joint military exercise between South Korea and United States, huge kind of cost. At this moment, South Korea and United States, we have the so-called burden sharing negotiation. So it's also depend on what kind of result we can get with the United States.
And it has not been finalized?
No, not yet.
All right. North Korea claimed that it conducted a very important test in Dongchang-ri without disclosing details. Yet, the news has triggered immediate response from President Trump and many others in Washington. What could be the very important test? Here's more on the story.
North Korea announced on December 8th that it conducted a very important test at its Seohae Satellite Launching Ground without releasing details. Commercial satellite imagery suggests that the regime tested a rocket engine. The image, taken on December 7th, presumably just before the test, shows vehicles and shipping containers at the engine test stand. The next day, the site is cleared, but the ground appears to have been disturbed by the exhaust from the test. Some argue what the regime tested could have been a solid propellant ICBM. North Korea's 2 ICBMs, Hwasong-14 and Hwasong-15, use a liquid propulsion system. In the case of a liquid fuel engine, it takes about an hour to fuel a missile, which makes the weapon more vulnerable to detection and less effective for preemptive strikes. But with a solid fuel engine, the weapon is ready to be fired in just 10 minutes using a mobile launcher. North Korea has been moving from liquid fuel to solid fuel missiles in recent years. Given that the North said the latest test would help alter its strategic position, some experts claim the test is likely to have involved a solid fuel engine. But others say that the regime might have tested a new liquid fuel engine, citing that similar tests have been carried out in the past at the Dongchang-ri site, and that the latest test was done vertically. In general, solid propellant rockets are tested horizontally, while liquid propellant ones are tested vertically. This has led some to speculate that the North tested a high-power liquid fuel rocket engine this time. Although the details of the test are still unknown, it is widely seen to be of an ICBM engine, and the world is watching closely for Washington's reaction and North Korea's additional provocation.
Professor Park, you are expert on North Korea's military capability. Tell us more about the North Korea's ICBM capability or ICBM technology,
Well, South Korea, our government mentioned that this time, this Dongchang-ri test is not the solid fuel test, engine test. Rather, we are not sure at this moment. But I think it is very clear that North Korea has continued to move to develop this engine that used the solid fuel. This
so
year,
from liquid fuel
to the solid
fuel.
fuel. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. This year, North Korea has launched, tested several of the missiles, including KN-23, started May 1st, so-called the North Korean version of Iskander, and that is a solid fuel missiles. And also, North Korea has launched SLBM, that is a solid fuel, and very recently they launched the super-sized, the multiple rocket,
Right.
and that is also solid fuel. So I don't know at this moment whether they have a solid fuel or the liquid fuel, but it's pretty clear that North Korea is going that direction. And because not only the North Korea, but all these advanced the nuclear power, including United States, Russia, and China, they are starting with the liquid fuel, but that it ended with the solid fuel. Solid fuel is far effective in several ways. First, they don't have any preparation time. They can inject the solid fuel, and then they can move around, and anytime, anywhere, they can launch the missiles. On the other hand, the liquid fuel, it takes more than an hour and two to inject the fuel. So that can be detected by South Korea or the United States. So they have a very, kind of not that effective compared to the solid fuel. That's why North Korea has tried to develop solid fuel rocket engine.
I see. We'll connect with another expert in the United States to broaden the perspective. We have on the line Mark Barry, Associate Editor of the International Journal on World Peace.
Okay.
Welcome to our program, Dr. Barry.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Very much appreciated.
North Korea is ramping up pressure on the United States, as you know, with a possible ICBM test ahead of the year's end deadline it imposed on the United States. It's set for North Korea-US talks. What will the North ICBM test affect future talks between the United States, or the talk between the United States and North Korea is over?
Well, the most important thing when we watch U.S. relations over the decades with North Korea is never look at the overt statements, or these days, including the Twitter statements. So what is said in KCNA, what is said on Twitter, what is said by the president in front of the White House grounds by his helicopter, it's one level of communication. It doesn't imply that things are as bad as they seem, but there are many levels to what's going on. So I don't want to put too much stock in what we're simply reading and hearing. However, we can say that especially since February, where President Trump abruptly ended the Hanoi summit, that Kim Jong-un was left empty-handed. He had to take a 60-hour train ride back home. It was a loss of face. It was embarrassing. And we have not recovered from that. And unfortunately, although we had a meeting on June 30th in the demilitarized zone, and it was hopeful, once we got around to the Stockholm negotiations in early October, they were over in a day. There was really no progress. So I think we have deeper problems going on that have been age-old problems since the end of the Korean War. The U.S. doesn't know how to grapple and to deal with North Korea. North Korea is too beholden to the way it behaves to know how to even contemplate how to behave differently. So this is the real situation we're stuck in. And I think if we put too much stock in the overt statements, we're really not going to see the forest through the trees.
Right, I see. Well, President Trump revived his old nickname for Kim Jong-un, calling him Rocket Man. And North Korea's ambassador to the United Nations, Kim Sung, said denuclearization is already off the table, off the negotiation table. Are we looking at a return to fire and fury 2 years ago?
I think the worst that we'll see in 2020 is something that's in between, not 2017, certainly not the heyday of 2018, and something worse than what we've been experiencing in 2019. However, I think the important thing is that once both sides start to get into a verbal brawl, it's harder for North Korea to backtrack from statements. It takes them many months to go through their gyrations, their emotions, to get to the point of being able to feel that they're on balance and able to move ahead again, because they have to do it with social cohesion, particularly among the elite. For President Trump, he could turn on a dime, and everyone has to follow him if they're going to remain in his administration. So he's got far more flexibility, and he is a master at manipulating the public perception of what he's doing. And you couple that with the fact that the American people are only focused on domestic matters right now. There's very little attention and credence played to foreign policy anywhere, whether it's Europe, Latin America, or Asia. It's just what's affecting the pocketbook right now for the American television and radio viewers. So my feeling is things will get a little bit worse, but I am not going to be so pessimistic as to think that things will go back to the fire and fury of 2017.
Dr. Berry, thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hey, have a good night.
Professor Park, do you agree that there are reasons for us to be optimistic, as Dr. Berry said?
Well, there is two kind of scenarios, and Dr. Berry just mentioned one of them that is a little bit not that pessimistic and kind of optimistic, which means that year 2020, both North Korea and United States will not break up this whole dialogue. They are going to have a chance to resume any kind of a talk between these two countries. Well, basically, that is one of the possibilities, but we are not sure whether they are going to go this direction or not. But one thing Dr. Berry mentioned is very interesting. He said that if we continue to kind of verbal abuse between these two sides, then both North Korea and United States, they do not have any choice but to go kind of a confrontation, because you cannot back up from this kind of hostility, the verbal abuse from the other side. So that's kind of what concerns for us.
But are you sure that we are not going to have another 2017 fire and fury on the Korean Peninsula? Is there any chance that we're going to witness a dramatic turnaround of the events so that United States and North Korea will come back to the negotiation table and achieve possible meaningful denuclearization of North Korea?
Well, another scenario, I think we have at least three different scenarios. First one is like muddling through. That means that we are not going to have any serious confrontation, total break up this dialogue. Rather, it's going to be continued the next year. Some kind of escalation, but not that the serious one. And there would be some possibility to have a working level dialogue, although it's very difficult to come up with some kind of agreement between United States and North Korea. So that's muddling through. The North Koreans will wait until the end of November, which is the United States, the presidential election. That's the first scenario. Second one is like the breakup scenario. We are not sure whether North Korea will do kind of ICBM or nuclear test. If they do, and it will break up this dialogue. And we already mentioned that the United States, and especially President Trump, he has no choice but to back to year 2017 fire fury or the maximum pressure. That will definitely escalate tension on the Korean Peninsula. And third, the scenario is like show must go on, which means that very slight chance, but the United States has a huge concession to North Korea. And we are not sure exactly what North Korea has wanted at this moment, but they wanted to have a huge easing of the economic sanctions.
Right.
So the United States come up with this kind of corresponding measures, but there is not that high chance to adapt by the United States at this moment.
Right, because if Donald Trump is going to make huge concessions to North Korea, then he will face criticism at
Yes,
home.
exactly.
Right, three very interesting scenarios. Professor Park, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's all we have for you today. We'll be back next week with more Korean Peninsula issues. Thanks for watching.